Yeah, so Dad wasn't happy about it. I know that. This was, he learned of it because he worked for a company that had mandatory, for life insurance purposes, mandatory health screenings. And back then in 1975, the diagnostic tests weren't nearly as kind as the ones that we're privileged to experience today. Um, I started getting jobs. This time I had a bachelor's degree. I guess in keeping with my experience at the University of Northern Colorado, my first job, January of 1975, was working at a daycare center within walking distance of campus. It was in what had been the previous year one of Columbus's elementary schools, um, probably called something like 16th Avenue School. And then Columbus no longer needed it, and it got leased or sold to a company, and a company rented space in it for a preschool. For some reason, I thought I'll take the first job opportunity I can get. I'd say, in retrospect, I was extremely naive on how to go about getting a job, how to go about identifying what kind of job one would get. And keep in mind, I'm not fresh out of high school. I have a bachelor's degree and I'm a veteran. And I still took the first job offered to me, I guess. Fortunately, I didn't have it for very long because my so-called dream job at that time, and I probably had applied for the job even before I graduated, was at the Little Professor Book Center. Back up a little bit, I'm getting ahead of myself. So hold that thought. The job I got after that was working in a kitchen at a natural food restaurant called Seva, S-E-V-A. And they served things like egg salad, for one thing, but what's the seedlings? Health food store seeds that you make into salad.
Sprouts?
Sprouts, thank you. I learned about the existence of sprouts and how good they can taste. And I got to make egg salad by boiling like 4 dozen eggs at a time and cracking them. I was really in heaven. It was a very harsh winter, and this was January and February. And I didn't get along very well with one particular guy that was in the kitchen with me. You know, it never came to a fight or an argument even. It's just that we could tell we were two different personality types. And I do remember him, though, telling me that it had been so cold that when he got into his car to come to work, it stopped because the rubber of one of his tires froze so solidly to the ice underneath it that it tore. Of course, I think the tire was in poor shape. It actually tore the rubber off of the overall wheel. That's my last memory. His name was Les, and that was my last memory. But there were some cool people that worked there. And I worked there maybe a couple of months, maybe. What I came to learn much later, upon meeting Sharon Levy, was Seva was a place, while she was still in high school, that her and her girlfriends, when they came to visit campus, which was often as they possibly could as high school seniors, they loved Seva because they could get served pitchers of sangria wine without being ID'd. So that's just kind of a little coincidence about the passage from 1973 to, well, that wasn't that much different. She graduated in 75. So anyway, the job I got after that was the one that I had applied for and been waiting for months and I interviewed for, and that was working as a clerk at Little Professor Book Center. At that time, Little Professor was a franchise, and the local franchisee owned 7 or 8 of them. They were all over town. I mean, if you can imagine so many bookstores in a city like Columbus, um, it was a different time. And the franchisee, oddly enough, I just mentioned my wife's Sharon. Her, they lived in Columbus because her dad, Jerry, was a psychologist at North American Rockwell out by the airport. And that would have been like around 1962 when they moved to Columbus. Sometime in the early 70s, Rockwell had a massive layoff in various shifts. And a lot of people who had tenure with Rockwell for a while got a nice payout. They got a severance check. I don't know if Jerry Levy was one of them, but Gaylord, George Gaylord definitely was. I think he had been an engineer. And he took his severance check and invested it in the Little Professor franchise. 7 in Columbus, maybe 6. 1 in Dover, Ohio, and 1 in Athens, Ohio. And the flagship store was at Lane Avenue Shopping Center, which is where I got to work. Now keep in mind, Lane Avenue Shopping Center is in a suburb of Columbus called Upper Arlington. And in later years, those of us who thought we were too hip to be tolerated, we always referred to it as Up Your Arlington. But it was like a high-end semi-mall. It had a roof over it, but it was just like one long corridor. But you know, you went there for expensive clothing and toys, and you went there for your books. And it was a tremendous bookstore, and it had everything: periodicals, out-of-town newspapers, just released novels, paperbacks, kids, everything. It was great. And of course, it served as the warehouse for the whole chain too. So I just loved my job, and my job didn't love me. The owner's wife, Mrs. Gaylord, don't even want to try to remember her name, and my manager, Kate, I could do nothing right for them. So I don't know, I mean, they never told me to shave or get a haircut or anything like that. But, you know, maybe it was my appearance or something, but after about 2 months, Kate took me back to her office and she says, Jim, we're gonna lay you off, and your last day is gonna be in about a week. Well, it wasn't about, I mean, they gave me a specific date. And I was about as hurt. I would compare the hurt of that with when I had taken and hitchhiked and all the way to Champaign, Urbana, Illinois, when I was 17 years old, to visit my girlfriend just to learn she was breaking up with me. It was traumatic, except the result was not sadness like it was on the way back to Columbus on the Greyhound bus. Quite honestly, by the time I landed in Columbus, I was over it anyway. But not so with Little Professor. I was angry, I was bitterly angry, I was violently angry. I wanted revenge. I mean, it was sick. I mean, I knew it, and I went for a long time plotting revenge. And I remember George had once made the comment, who knows why it came up, but we were talking about shoplifting theft. And he very smugly chuckled and said, oh, people who read books don't steal. And I began a short-lived career of making a point of every time I walked into that store, walking out with something I didn't pay for. I mean, it was a book that I wanted. So I can't say I'm very proud of that. And kids, if you're listening to this, I'm not proud of it at all. I'm ashamed of it. But I had a lot of growing up to do at that age. So after that, I got a series of jobs. Well, it wasn't a series. I ended up getting hired as a server at the Neal House downtown. The historical, uh, Charles Dickens had stayed there, for Christ's sakes. It's right across the street from the State House. Many of the people that I served were lobbyists or legislators, because you could walk from the state capitol underneath High Street, we're back to that motif again, and up through the basement of the Neal House to the dining room. And I hated the job, but I liked the freedom it gave me. And there was a strange little bar that no longer exists. It was on West State Street, where the Ho Toi restaurant ended up being. And it had some sort of a beachcomber. In fact, it might have been called the beachcomber, but it had like a beach hut with a thatched roof motif to it. It was just the closest. I'll call it a townie bar. I guess downtown, every town's a townie bar, but it was a dive bar that was open at lunchtime, and I hated my job so much that I took my tip money and spent some of it in the dive bar. But I also was taking out poetry books from the main library, just about by the dozens. I was just reading and thinking I was writing a lot of poetry. That's kind of where it really began, was the summer of '75. And did that for 2 or 3 months. I did that to the end of summer, and Jeannie and I planned a vacation. And before we had planned that vacation, I had applied at United Parcel Service for a job loading trucks. That at that point they were hiring for the busy holiday season. I mean, they get real busy in the fall. And then Jeannie and I went to visit her mom and dad in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and then continued up the coast. Stopped in Worcester, Mass. Worcester? Yeah, Worcester, Mass. Searched and found the grave of Jack Kerouac. And, no, not Worcester, Lowell. Actually, Jeannie found it. And she goes yelling over at me, here it is, I found it. And so I looked at the grave of Jack Kerouac, and it was a camping vacation for us. So we ended up in Arcadia National Park in Maine. It was just totally a lovely vacation, camping all the way and eating by campfire and stuff. And then we came back home, and not long after that, her mom died.